The air erupted with violent buzzing as thousands of African killer bees descended on Pinewood Elementary's spring picnic. Children's laughter transformed into screams within seconds. Lorenzo Carter looked up from a hedge he was trimming at the far end of Pinewood Elementary's playground. His weathered 65-year-old hands froze on the gardening shears as his trained eyes identified the approaching threat immediately. A massive dark cloud of insects was descending on the playground where over 60 children were enjoying their spring picnic day activities. "Killer bees," he muttered, his military instincts kicking in instantly. The scene transformed from joyful to chaotic in seconds. Teachers frantically tried to gather children, but panic was spreading faster than organization. The main pathway back to the building was already blocked by the densest part of the swarm, effectively cutting off the most direct escape route. "Everyone stay calm," shouted a young teacher, Miss Peterson, but her voice trembled with fear. Lorenzo knew the rural school was at least 25 minutes from a nearest emergency response team. Far too long with African killer bees attacking children. 3 kids were already swatting frantically at multiple stings, and one small boy was showing the telltale signs of an allergic reaction, his face reddening alarmingly. The former Marine Corps veteran straightened his back, old habits resurfacing as he assessed the situation with practiced calm. It had been decades since Vietnam, but some skills never faded. He scanned the schoolyard, mentally inventorying potential resources. The garden shed, maintenance supplies, the sprinkler system. Time was the enemy now, just like in combat. He had minutes, maybe less, before the situation became fatal. Lorenzo moved with purposeful speed toward the closest group of teachers trying to shield children with their light jackets. "African killer bees," he announced in a calm, authoritative voice that cut through the chaos. "They're far more aggressive than regular honeybees and will pursue threats for hundreds of yards. We need to move methodically, not run blindly." Ms. Peterson turned to him, clutching 2 crying first graders. "Mr. Carter, what should we do? The main doors are blocked." The swarm had indeed formed a living barrier between them and the school building. Lorenzo quickly assessed the playground's layout. The killer bees were concentrating near the main entrance, drawn perhaps by the colorful flags and decorations for the spring picnic. He noted the positions of all student groups. The 3rd graders huddled under the jungle gym, a group of 2nd graders trapped by the baseball diamond, and several kindergartners frozen in terror near the sandbox. "We've got multiple sting victims already," said Coach Brennan, who was pressing a cold water bottle against the crying girl's arm. "Maddie here took at least 10 stings, and Tommy by the swings looks like he's having an allergic reaction." Lorenzo focused on the small boy whose face was now alarmingly swollen. Anaphylaxis, potentially fatal without immediate intervention. The gardener's weathered face remained composed, but inside, his mind raced through combat triage protocols he hadn't used in decades. Another child screamed as bees found their way under his t-shirt. The swarm was growing denser, the buzzing louder. Lorenzo estimated at least 20,000 bees, possibly part of a displaced colony searching for a new home. "Do we have any EpiPens in the nurse's office?" Lorenzo asked, his mind calculating available resources. "Yes, but it's in the main building," Ms. Peterson replied, her voice tight with worry. Lorenzo's gaze swept over to the maintenance shed where he kept his tools. In his mind, he itemized what was available: gardening equipment, fertilizer, his personal tools, the riding mower, fuel canisters, rags, his lunch cooler with ice packs, and, most critically, the smoker he used for his weekend beekeeping hobby. The path to the shed was partially obscured by a smaller segment of the swarm, but it was their best chance. He thought back to his military training in Vietnam, where they'd learned to handle various environmental threats, including insect swarms. "I need 3 volunteers," he announced. The rest form a tight circle around the children, jackets over heads. Cover all skin possible. 4 teachers immediately stepped forward, eyes wide but determined. "We need to reach my shed," Lorenzo explained, pointing to the small structure 50 yards away. "I have equipment that can create smoke barriers. Smoke confuses their sensory systems, disrupts their attack pheromones and communication." A crash of breaking glass drew their attention as a panicked 4th grader had broken a window trying to get inside, cutting his arm. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. We have maybe 5 minutes before more children develop serious reactions. Lorenzo said grimly. Let's move. Lorenzo led his small team of teachers toward the maintenance shed, moving in a controlled, measured pace. Don't swat or run, he instructed. Sudden movements and sounds trigger their attack instinct. Breathe slowly through your noses. As they navigated through the lighter edges of the swarm, Lorenzo's mind flashed back to 1971, to a specialized training course on environmental threats. The Marine instructor's voice echoed in his memory. Smoke disrupts insect communication. In survival situations, controlled smoke can be your best defense against swarming insects. It masks the alarm pheromones they use to coordinate attacks. Reaching the shed, Lorenzo quickly unlocked it and ushered the teachers inside. A few bees had followed him in, but he calmly crushed them with a rag to prevent them from releasing more alarm pheromones. Coach Brennan, grab those burlap sacks and that roll of garden wire, Lorenzo directed, falling naturally into command mode. Ms. Peterson, that bucket of water. Ms. Williams, my toolbox from the back shelf. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he retrieved his beekeeping smoker, a metalcan with a nozzle and bellows. This isn't nearly enough of what we need, he muttered, but it's a start. Lorenzo quickly sketched a crude map of the playground on the shed's dusty workbench. We need to create multiple smoke stations to establish a safe corridor from here to the emergency exit on the far side of the building, he explained. The main swarm is blocking the front entrance, but if we can divert them with enough smoke points, we can escort the children around to the side entrance. He began rapidly improvising additional smoke devices. He grabbed metal buckets, punched control ventilation holes in them using his drill, and filled them with slightly dampened burlap leaves and small amounts of fertilizer. The trick is creating thick, cool smoke, he explained while working. Hot smoke or flames will agitate them further. This is about mask and redirect, not destruction. Coach Brennan watched in amazement. Where did you learn all this, Lorenzo? Marine Corps, he replied simply as he fashioned carrying handles from garden wire. Vietnam taught us to use whatever we had. Adaptation is survival. Lorenzo then instructed the teachers on how to create makeshift protective gear. He had them layer clothing, seal openings with garden tape, and use mesh planting bags as improvised veils. We'll establish 5 smoke points, he explained, pointing to locations on his crude map. These will create a protected corridor. Ms. Peterson, you and Coach Brennan will help guide the children through this corridor once it's established. Ms. Williams, you'll help me deploy the smoke stations. He demonstrated how to safely light the smoke devices and how to position them for maximum effectiveness. The key is steady, continuous smoke production, he instructed. Keep the material from burning too hot by adding damp leaves periodically. Lorenzo assigned positions and tasks with the precision of a military operation. He fashioned a special carrying sling for his larger smoker from garden straps and prepared dampened cloths for the children to cover their faces. Remember, this isn't perfect protection, he warned. Some bees will still get through. Priority is the children showing allergic reactions. They go first, fastest. The rest move in orderly groups, no running. Before they exited the shed, Lorenzo took a moment to check each teacher's improvised protective gear, adjusting and reinforcing weak points. In the Corps, we had a saying, he told them as he worked, his fingers nimble despite his age. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. The smoke will disrupt their ability to coordinate attacks. But stay vigilant. Looking at the determined faces of a civilian team, Lorenzo felt a familiar pre-mission focus settle over him. It had been decades since he led people in a life-threatening situation, but the responsibility felt like an old, well-worn glove. Let's save those kids, he said simply, lighting the first smoke device. Lorenzo moved out first, operating the primary smoke of that belch stick. Cool clouds into the air. Ms. Williams followed closely, deploying the secondary smoke devices according to his plan. The effect was immediate. Portions of the swarm began to disperse in confusion as the smoke disrupted their chemical communication. It's working, Ms. Williams exclaimed as bees near them began flying erratically, no longer in coordinated attack patterns. Stay focused, Lorenzo cautioned. We need all 5 smoke points active before we move the children. They worked methodically, positioning the improvised smoke devices in a strategic pattern that would create a protected corridor to the side entrance. Despite their makeshift protection, both were stung multiple times. Lorenzo barely flinched as several bees found their way under his collar, focusing instead on maintaining the smoke output. When the 4th smoke station was deployed, a pained cry cut through the buzzing. Lorenzo turned to see Tommy, the boy with severe allergic reactions, collapsed near the jungle gym. His face was now frighteningly swollen, and his breathing had become visibly labored. "He needs the EpiPen now," shouted Miss Peterson, who was still protecting other children. Lorenzo made a split-second decision that went against his own evacuation plan. "Maintain the smoke perimeter," he ordered Ms. Williams. Then, pushing his larger smoker to maximum output, he moved directly toward the struggling child, creating a protective smoke cloud around himself. Despite the smoke, dozens of bees attacked him as he crossed the playground, their stingers penetrating his thin protection. Each step brought sharp new pain, but Lorenzo moved steadily forward, the discipline of decades-old training carrying his 65-year-old body through the assault. Reaching Tommy, Lorenzo found the boy barely conscious. In one smooth motion, he removed his work jacket and wrapped it completely around the child, knowing full well this would leave himself more exposed. He lifted the boy and turned back toward the emergency exit path they had created. The corridor is established. Ms. Williams called out, "We can start moving the children." Coach Brennan began leading the first group of students through the smoke-protected pathway, while Ms. Peterson organized the next group to follow. The smoke stations were working, creating a visible boundary that most of the bees avoided. Lorenzo, now carrying Tommy and with significantly less protection, felt the full fury of the swarm. Dozens of bees covered his arms and neck, stinging repeatedly, but his face remained focused and determined. Each step was deliberate as he navigated through the thickest part of the smoke corridor. "Keep moving steadily," he called to the children as he passed them. "Stay in the smoke, don't run." When he reached the emergency exit, the school nurse who had been trapped inside rushed forward to help with Tommy. Lorenzo handed over the wrapped child, his arms now visibly swollen from multiple stings. "EpiPen," he managed to say through gritted teeth. The nurse nodded and immediately began treatment. Lorenzo turned back immediately, ignoring the nurse's protests about his own condition. He needed to ensure all children made it through the corridor before the smoke devices burned out. Despite intense pain in the beginning of his own allergic response, he moved back into the smoke-filled battleground. "Not leaving anyone behind," he muttered, echoing a Marine Corps ethos as he disappeared back into protective smoke to help guide the remaining children to safety. 23 minutes after the first bee appeared, the last child was brought safely through the emergency exit. Lorenzo, now barely recognizable with swollen features from over 50 stings, slumped against the wall as paramedics finally arrived at the scene. "All accounted for?" he asked Ms. Peterson, who was helping coordinate with emergency services. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Every single student is safe," she confirmed, her voice breaking with emotion. "The doctors say you got Tommy his EpiPen just in time. A few more minutes and—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Lorenzo simply nodded, wincing as paramedics began treating his numerous stings. When the school principal tried to commend his heroism, he waved it away. "The teachers did the hard part," he insisted. "I just provided some smoke and direction." But the truth was evident to everyone. The maintenance man they barely noticed before had transformed into a commanding presence that saved dozens of lives. Parents arriving at the scene listened in awe as their children described how Mr. Carter moved through the bees like they couldn't touch him, and how he knew exactly what to do when everyone else was scared. A week later, still recovering from his injuries, Lorenzo was surprised to find the entire school gathered in the gymnasium for an impromptu ceremony. The principal announced that the school board had approved a new safety program, with Lorenzo invited to help design emergency protocols. "I'm just a gardener," he protested quietly to Ms. Peterson. "No," she replied firmly. "You're the Marine who never stopped serving, even when the uniform came off." As Lorenzo reluctantly accepted the school's thank you card signed by every student, He reflected on how military training had shaped his life in ways he never expected. The discipline, crisis management, and resourcefulness he'd learned decades ago had preserved innocent lives today. Perhaps this was the true meaning of service, being ready when your community needs you most, regardless of age or title. Looking at the eager faces of the children before him, Lorenzo wondered how many other veterans were out there, quietly carrying valuable skills that could make a critical difference in unexpected emergencies. How many lives could be saved if that knowledge was shared? Would you tell us about how you learned to do what you did? Asked a small voice from the crowd. Lorenzo smiled slightly, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Well, he began, it started with understanding that preparation and keeping calm are your best weapons in any crisis. His story serves as a powerful reminder that our veterans carry exceptional skills that continue to protect our communities long after their military service ends. Do you know a veteran whose training helped in an emergency situation? Share their story in the comments below. If this account of quick thinking and courage inspired you, please like and subscribe for more remarkable rescue stories that highlight the extraordinary capabilities of ordinary heroes among us.